our monthly make for April, so we do a monthly make and do a YouTube sew along video with it. If you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, then you'll be notified of any recent videos that we put up. So this month we made the Monsterfabriken Lizzie Skirt. So it's available in, it goes by hip size, from a hip size 90 centimetres to 106 or 104 to 124. It's an asymmetrical skirt, wrap skirt with some asymmetrical pocket placement. So it's got a pocket here, it's got a hip pocket there, and then it's got a pocket at the back. It does up with a button on the inside there, and then buttons down here, and it's a wrap skirt. So we made it. So I made it up in our 11.5 ounce Ecru cotton denim. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so for this month, as I say, we're making the Monsterfabriken Lizzie skirt. So it's a sort of asymmetrical wrap over skirt with sort of asymmetrical pocket placement, and I'm making it in our Ecru denim. So I have cut out all my pattern pieces, marked my notches, and done tailor's tacks where the button placements are going to go. I've also just marked in where my buttonholes are going to go with some carbon paper and a tracing wheel. I have, which it doesn't say to do, just put some bias binding, not bias binding, sorry, bias tape around the edge of the curved pocket there, just so that sometimes on a pocket edge, if it gets a lot of use tucking your hands in the pocket, it can stretch out, so that just helps it to keep its shape. So I'll put that there. Interfacing, it just wants you to interface your button reinforcement piece, which is piece number 8, that one there. So I've interfaced that, and your get this right, your waistband facing. So the back waistband, let me get this right now, the back waistband facing, you need to interface that one because you just got one of those, and your right front waistband facing, okay, and then your left waistband front facing has you've got 2 of, okay, so you just need to interface one of those, which will be the inside facing piece. Okay, so then the first thing to do is to start working on your pockets. So you've got your piece 9, which is your pocket shield, I think they call it, yeah, pocket shield, this one here. So you want to just overlock around the outer edge of that pocket piece there, so just overlock around that outer edge, and then you're going to get your pocket bag, which is piece number 14, and then we are going to just put that onto there like that. So we're going to stitch that around there to secure that in place, and I'll base stitch up and around there as well, just to hold that in place on there. So you want the wrong side of your pocket shield onto the right side of your pocket bag like that, which it does clearly say in the instructions. Okay, so we're going to do that. I'll go and do that, and then we're going to attach it to the front of the skirt where the pocket is. Okay, so that's where I've stitched around there. Okay, and that's what it looks like on the back. So I've just stitched around there and around that edge just to secure that piece onto there. So then we want our right front piece, which has got this pocket section here. So we want to put right sides together to just align that like so. Okay, so we're just going to pin that in place around that pocket edge there. Oh, the elephant's alive. The elephant pin cushion, that is. Right, Okay, so I'm going to stitch around that pocket edge now. It's a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to clip around there, then we'll clip into the curve and turn it over to the right way. Okay, so we've stitched around that curve of the pocket there. Okay, so we've stitched around there. So now I'm just going to, I will have to turn it this way. I can't snip it. So I'm just going to snip around just to try and release that curve when we turn it under the other way. It's best to use nice, if you've got scissors with a nice sharp point, then it's much better you do it that. Don't try and do it that way, because then if you slip you're going to cut through your stitching. So if you just do it so that the point of your scissors will be lined up around there, then that'll be nice. So that will mean that then that curve will open as we turn that over. So it says to turn it over, press it and then stitch, but I think I am going to understitch that just to help make sure that that edge, yeah, it says to turn it over and then stitch and then do a top stitch, but I am going to understitch. So first of all I'm just going to press that seam allowance I've snipped towards the lining here. Let me do that and I'll show you. Okay, so I just press the seam allowance there towards the lining fabric, and then I'm going to understitch around close to this edge, and that will just help that pocket edge fold over. It just makes it much neater finish, so I'll do that. Okay, so that's the edge. Oops, get hold of it now. That's the edge, that's just understitched. So I've just stitched the pocket facing to the seam allowance, just along that edge, along there. Okay, and then when you fold that over, so that was that way, so then when you fold it over to the inside, it naturally then what helps to pull your so that when it's turned that way you should just see the edge of your denim fabric here, your outer fabric here, so that then when you look at it from that side you can't see any of your lining. Okay, so now it wants you just to, now I've just got to top stitch around that line there. It does say to do 1, but I'll probably do 2 rows of top stitching. That's just my preference. So yeah, so I'm just going to pin that in place just to hold that pocket edge down. Nicely away from the edge, like so. There we go. I'm just going to stitch 2 rows of top stitching around that pocket edge. Okay, so that's my pocket edge top stitched around there. Okay, so now it wants you to get this piece here and just fold that over there, and then we're going to join around this pocket edge, just the pocket, not to the skirt. So we'll pin those edges together. You could French seam it at this point if you wanted to. You could sew it with the wrong sides together first, then with a 1/4 inch seam, trim it down and then turn it in the other way and do that. But I am gonna, when I managed to keep my selvage edge here as a good nice finish at the bottom, and I'm going to overlock it anyway, so all inside. So I'm going to stitch that round at 1/2 inch seam allowance, just this pocket edge, just around there. Okay, and then I'm going to overlock that to neaten the edge, just because of this bit here, and then we will baste it in place to the top, the side and the top of the skirt. So I'll go and stitch that first. So I've stitched and overlocked around the bottom of my pocket there, and then you're going to want to line up these edges down the side there. Okay, so I'm going to pin that in place. We'll just give it a press on the iron, helps as well, just to make sure you've got everything lined up. and I'm just going to base stitch down this side seam. I'll show you from the other side. And this top bit here, so you've got a little, you should have a little notch in the top of your pocket bag bit. That's where it folds, and then it naturally just sits along the top there. I'll pin that in place. Okay, so then when you look at it on the other side, that's your pocket. Okay, and then your pocket opening is there. All right, so I'm just going to base stitch along the top there and down there, and then I think we're going to apply the top of the waistband bit for this front. Okay, so the right front waistband is non-interfaced, and then the two waistband pieces, I'm going to need to interface both of those, okay, because they're both your facing pieces. So your number 6, your waistband front facing, is actually a facing for both the right and left once this edge is, this end is turned under. So yeah, so this waistband front on the right I haven't interfaced, I've just cut a new one, I haven't interfaced it. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is to line up the notch on the top there. Yeah, and the pocket edge there, and stitch that along. Yeah, so we're going to line that up along there. So there's a notch there. And you've got a notch there that joins up with your pocket. So the notch there joins up with the edge of your pocket there. You've got a bit of a curve there, so you just got to ease that in. I think this is stitched with a... So yeah, your normal seam allowance at 1/2 inch along the top there. So I'm going to finish pinning that along the top, stitch that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then press the seam allowance upwards towards the waistband. Okay, and then we're going to do the darts in the back pieces next. Okay, so I've stitched that. Okay, 1/2 inch seam allowance along there. Just press the seam allowance up towards the waistband, and then I have just graded the seam slightly, so I've just trimmed down one side slightly more than the other, if that's in focus. I think it is. Okay, so now we're going to put that, so that's the front of our skirt piece done with our pocket in there. Okay, and now we're going to do the darts in the back. So we're going to put that piece to one side for a moment. Right, let's see what I'm doing. So these are our two back pieces, and it does, so on your pattern piece it does say you've got a pocket positions, as I say, it's asymmetrical for your pocket positions, so it's got pocket placement marked for your back left and pocket position for your back right. Okay, so you'll need to mark those specifically for your pieces. So that's the centre back seam, so you'll need to mark, I just marked it with some tailor's tacks. So that's my, got to think now, yeah, that's my left, and then that's my right piece. So I've just got tailor's tack there and there. That's for my dart there. So these are the tailor's tacks for my pocket that sits across the side seam there. Okay, so let's put that out of the way. So what I'm going to do is I just tend to put, you can sell because the outside seam is a bit more angular but it is easy to get confused. So I'm just going to put a pin there which marks my centre back seam. Okay, so I can keep a note of that. It saves sewing the two side seams together and then centre back to the side. So first of all, we're going to do the darts. So I've measured and put the dart leg points together there, which I can find them. There they are. That's my dart point with my tailor's tack in it there. Nice and flat, in between. So then you're going to mark. So I've just matched up my notches on the dart leg bits there, and then put a pin in the fold there where the dart point is, and then I'm going to line up my notch there to my dart point there. That in. There we go, and then that's where I'm going to. So I'm going to back stitch there, and then stitch along and come off the end there and tie the ends off so that it's not too pointy. Okay, so I'm going to do that on both the backs, and then sew the centre back seam next to the back piece of the skirt. So I'll go and sew these darts first. Okay, so that's the darts sewn in place. Okay, and then it wants you to press them towards the centre back seam. So your dart legs, you're just going to press towards that centre back seam there. Okay, and then we're going to join both of those together right down that centre back seam there. So when you're pinning a long seam, definitely well pinning any seam really, just pin it at the top and then pin it at the bottom to make sure those are lining up, and then you can pin it evenly in between, so at the bottom and the top. And then I'm going to pin all the way down there, stitch that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, then finish the seam, and then it wants us to press it towards the left hand side and then top stitch down. Okay, so I'll do that next. Okay, so that's our back piece. That's the centre back seam sewn down, and then just overlocked the edges, or you can knit and zigzag, whatever you're going to use on your machine, and then top stitch down. So I've just done one row. I think I'm just going to do one row on the seams and then 2 on the pocket edge tops, I think. So I'm going to put that to one side with the other front skirt, and then next we're going to do the let's track which side this is now. This is the left front skirt. So we've got piece 1, which is the left front of the skirt, and then we also need piece 8, which is the button reinforcement piece, which is this piece here. Okay, so it wants us, we'll have interfaced that already, and then it just wants us to overlock to neaten around that curved edge. So then it wants us to wrong sides together, attach that to here. That's the right bit. Yeah, the button's there, so we just need to get where that needs to go. I probably need to mark my buttons to line up where they need to go. I'll mark the top and the bottom one, I think. And the bottom. I'm just going to mark the top and bottom of those button placements so that I can get this in the right place. and that's my bottom button, which is that one there. So I'm just matching them up with some tailor's tacks I've got on the other side, just to align those, just to make sure I get that in the right place. There we go, so then that sits on there. So all it wants us to do at the moment is just support stitch on the side seams, seam allowance. Yeah, so and then literally I'm just going to stitch down there. You don't stitch this on here, you just stitch this down here. Okay, so I'm going to do that next, and then we're going to join the front to the back. Okay, just stitched within the seam allowance just to hold that piece in place along there, and I will leave that pinned there just to help keep it out of the way. So then we're going to attach this now at the side seams. So let's get our centre back. And then that's that side. Notch that joins up there. Bottom. Notch is there. Okay, so I'm going to pin all that down that side, and then the other side. So this is the right side with your waistband bit on here, but the top, this top here does meet the top of the skirt, because the other back skirt and the other side front is a grown on waistband with the facing. It's just the front piece has to have a overlapping bit at the front because of this pocket that you put on. An unusual construction, but I love things that are just slightly different, and I love the asymmetrical style of this skirt. I think it's very much like sort of toast design things, the company toast. Both of those 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm going to overlock my edges. You can zigzag on your machine. Then we're going to press probably towards the back, I expect. Yeah, press the seam allowances towards the back of the skirt and then top stitch down each side. Okay, so that's all that stitched in place, both those seams. So you've now got one long piece. Okay, you've got your right front, your two backs, and then your left front. And I've top stitched, overlocked and top stitched those down. So then it tells you to press under 1 centimetre and then 5 centimetres down the fronts and along the hem, and then do the pockets. So I'm going to do the pockets first, and then I'll press down the fronts and along the hem after I've done the pockets. But I have gone ahead and I've decided to overlock to neaten my edges down the front, both fronts, and also along the bottom, all the way along the bottom, because I'm not going to turn under 1 centimetre and then 5 centimetres like that, I don't think. I might do, but I don't think. I prefer to have it flat like that, particularly as it's on a band here. I want to keep the sort of flexibility of that fabric, and sometimes if you've got 3 layers like that, then it can just make it a little bit bulky, so I prefer to have it flatter like that. Can't see that very well. So I prefer to overlock my edges and just press it over. So I'll press it under 6 centimetres along there rather than the centimetre and then 5, because I'll probably have it open like that. So, but I'm going to do that later after I've done the pockets, because the pockets don't get in the way of the fronts. So yeah, so I just prefer to do it that way round. So put that to one side for a minute. Find my pockets. One on that one. Okay. Yeah, so it wants me to fold down the seam allowance at the top and then fold it under, but I think again I'm just going to overlock all the way around my pockets, and then I probably won't fold under the top. I will probably just fold it over the once. So I'll go and overlock those first, and then I can show you what I've done. Okay, so I've just overlocked all the way around mine. Rather than folding up, they want you to fold over that top edge like that if you want to do it that way by a centimetre. Okay, and then that one again like that. Okay, but I prefer to just overlock mine. I think it just makes less sort of bulk within the pocket. So then it wants you to turn back right sides together where the notches on the side of your pattern pieces. So both pattern pieces are the same. Well, they're different size, so they're not the same, but they've both got a mark here where your fold line is. So if you just put a notch into the edge of that on your fabric, then you can see where you're going to fold. That's it on there. Pins, let's spell pins. Okay, over like that, and then it's worth just checking, just to check that they are even each side. So that's 6 centimetres. Yeah, so that's even each side. So do exactly the same thing with the other pocket edge, pocket top. Fold it at that fold line, and then we're just going to stitch down this edge here on each of those pocket pieces. Yeah, so the side, so yeah, so it's a 1/2 inch seam allowance, the same, nothing any different at the moment. It's slightly different on the hems and things, but same on these. So again, just check that to make sure that that is right. That's good. That just needs to come down just a fraction. So 1/2 inch seam allowance down there and there, the same on there and there, and then we can turn that all in the right way and fold under our edges and apply them to our skirt piece. Okay, so I've stitched down both those sides on both of the pockets, and then you just need to turn those in the right way, and just use a point turner to get those corners out nice and sharply. I'll think about that in a minute. And then, so then when you've turned that under, then these edges will turn under. So press those all, press the bottom edge up, and then you just need to top stitch along this pocket edge here. So I prefer just to tack along from the wrong side there, so that I can see like that, so that I can see roughly where that's going to align, and then you've got a line to follow on this side, and I've just put a pin there which marks the center front, so that marks the point where I'll pivot, and then because it's slightly angular. So I've done that, so I'm going to do exactly the same with this one. Top stitch those pocket edges, and then we'll apply them to the skirt. Okay, so I've stitched both of those, top stitched those along the top edge there. All right, and then it wants you to place them onto your skirt piece. So the bigger pocket goes on the right front, I think it said. larger on the right side. So the small one on the back and then the larger one on the right side, and it should line up with your tailor's tacks. I've lost one there, but that's fine. I can put that there and there. If I can get that lined up okay, so that one there. Okay, it's on the side seam there, and then that one lines up with the bottom one there. Can be handy just to use. I used to use some bigger pins for this because it's just easier to. Get a small one. Okay, and once you're happy you've got the placement of that, then you can just take your tailor's tacks out, saves them getting caught in any of your stitching. That's that one. So you could stitch that one and then do the back one, or you can pin them both on. I'll pin them both on, I think. So that one's going to line up with that corner there. Attach the other, and that one there. A couple more in on the sides, just to make sure that stays nicely in alignment. So I'm going to stitch around here, and then I probably will put some bar tacks on, which I don't think it tells you to do. No, but I will do. Okay, so we're going to stitch, so starting there, down there, around there, and up to there. So say you can take your tailor's tacks out. Now, if you're happy with all that pinned in place, just so that they don't get in the way. Leave those, I'll leave those. Those are for my buttonhole, my button placements. Oops, I'm stuck. Okay. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go and stitch around all of those. I'll back stitch at the beginning and end there, and then I'm going to put some bar tacks on there, I think, just to reinforce the pockets, putting your hands in and out the pockets like you would do on jeans and things. So I'm going to do that, and then I think it's sorting out the, yeah, then it's doing the hem and the waistband next. Okay, so I'll go and stitch these. Okay, so that's my pockets, so you can see it. So that's my pockets sewn on. So I've just stitched around there, and then I've bar tacked just at the top, just to give the pockets some extra strength, because putting your hands in and out the pockets. Now the only other thing to remember is on this side, when you go to stitch your pocket on, you just need to keep this, you just need to keep the pocket, oops, when you stitch the side, right side pocket on, you just need to keep the pocket bag away from the inside. Let's take that tailor's tack out, don't need that anymore. From there, so you just need to keep that away, out of the way. Okay, so yeah, so that's those done. So next it's the hem. I'm pull this tailor's tack out. There we go, out of there. So on the hem, I'm not going to, it does suggest you, oops, oh, I think it's going everywhere today. Right, so on the hem it suggests you turn it under 1 centimetre. And then again, but I'm not keen to do that because I just want it to sit flatter. So I'm just gonna, I've overlocked the edges and I'm gonna keep it like that. Okay, I think I could turn it under. No, I prefer that it's nice, that it's flatter, so I'm gonna leave it like that. So I've pressed under the hem edges, the front hem down the front and the hem at the bottom. And then what it wants you to do, I've done it on that corner, I'll show you on this corner. It wants you to turn it over to the, so you've got right sides together, line up those corner edges and then pin that in place along that corner. So it's like a mitered corner that they're cut into the pattern. So that's that one there. Okay, I'm going to stitch it 1 centimetre along to there. Now if you're folding back your edges 1 centimetre, then you want to leave 1 centimetre gap from the end. But I'm not, I'm just leaving my edges flat like that, so I'll sew to the end. But if you're turning under that centimetre, then leave that centimetre gap at the end there. Okay, so I'll do that, then we can turn those into the right way, and then it's putting the waistband on before we stitch those down. Okay, so then you've stitched your that there, and then you just trim that corner at the point there so it's got room to turn out, and then press the seam open, and then you can turn it through like so, and you just might need a point turner just to get into that. There we go, just into that point. Sit right on that corner. There we go, and then that's a nice mitered corner there. So I'm just going to pin that back in place, and I can give it a press in a minute. So then the next piece, do the same with the other corner obviously, and then so the next thing is to piece the waistband pieces together. So you've got your back waistband and then your 2 side waistbands. So that one there and then this one here. Okay, so I'm going to fix that onto there. So you're going to stitch these at I think it's 1/2 inch, lost track of what my seam allowance is now. I think it's 1/2 inch seam allowance. Just pin this. Check that. So that's the 2 waistband pieces. So you've got your middle, your back piece, and then you've got the side seams joining that side of your waistband, and then that side. Okay, so we're going to stitch both of those seams at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Press the seams open. I'll probably trim them down a little bit as well, and then it does, along this outer edge, it asks you to fold up a centimetre, I think it is, but I just think that will make it too bulky, and particularly around here where it's a roll-on waistband, I prefer just to overlock around that lower edge. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll fix the waistband to the skirt. Okay, so I've stitched those seams, trim them down, press them open, and I've just overlocked around the lower edge of the waistband facing. So now we're going to just attach this right sides together. That way. So your side seam will join your side seam there. Bigger pins. And then make sure that's set on nice and flat. Again, just make sure, so your dart legs should be going towards your centre back seam. So just make sure they're going that way. Okay, I'll pin one half and show you. So that's the two side seams matched centre pin there. I'll do the other half in a minute, and then I'll just show you. So along to this edge here, that wants to come round and join there. Yeah, so this edge. So this edge that you folded under there, you need to unfold that, and then this needs to join there. So I think we join that first actually. Attach this along down this seam first. Let's do that first. So I think that's stitched down there at 1 centimetre, and then we'll carry on, do the same on the other side. So as I say, it just unfolds. Unfold that edge. Pin that together there. Okay, so I'm going to stitch it down there, 1 centimetre seam allowance, down that side at 1 centimetre seam allowance. So that's just folded to the front, pin to the front edges of your skirt. Okay, so I'll go and sew those, and then we can fold that back and pin the rest of the waistband. Okay, so that's that sewn, okay, to that edge there. And then I've just pressed that seam open. Let's just pin that so I can show you better. So then with that pressed open, you want to fold it back along that fold where you pressed, pressed it over the other way earlier. Folded your front hem, so that's like that, and then that will all sit nicely along there. So then you're just going to pin that in place all along the top. So we're going to stitch a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way along the top there, and then I'll probably grade the seam a little bit as well. Yeah, it doesn't say to understitch, but I probably will. So I'm going to stitch along there first, and then I'll understitch as far as I can along there just to help that fold over to the right way. So I'll show you what that looks like when I've done that. Okay, so I've graded the waistband side of the seam down slightly along there, trimmed the corners, just trimmed a little bit of bulk off here on my seams, and then I'm going to press the waistband facing the seam allowance there towards the waistband facing, and then I'm going to understitch all along that edge there. So I'll show you when I've done that. Okay, so that's where I've understitched, okay, along there. So you're just literally stitching that seam allowance to your facing, and that way when it then folds over, it naturally folds over to the wrong side, leaving you a nice neat finish along the top there. So I'm just going to finish sort of pressing and putting that in, and then I'll show you how I'm just going to tack along this lower edge to mark my where I'm going to top stitch. So I'll show you how I do that shortly. Okay, so I've turned my waistband in over to the right way, and turned all the edges in, given that a press, and then I've just done a basting stitch around, just tucking into the ditch of the seam there, and all the way around that top edge there, just to hold that waistband on, and then all the way down the side, around the hem and up the other side there, just so that then I can, when I top stitch, I can follow that basting stitch, because it's quite a 5 centimetre depth there to top stitch in, so then I can get a nice straight line on that. So I'm going to top stitch around those, and then we'll do the buttonholes. Okay, so that's the out the way. That's the buttonholes sewn on there, and then the one buttonhole there. So then you've got one button here that's on the inside, and then your 5 buttons there. So I had a set of 5 buttons that I've managed to use there, but I've just got a plain clear quite flat button just to put on the inside on that one there, because that won't be visible, so I could then use my 5 buttons I wanted to use there. So to open the buttonholes, I tend to use a buttonhole chisel. Ooh, I over a bit. So I put a little bit of fray stop on, just along there. And I prefer to use a buttonhole chisel, buttonhole cutter, particularly with a denim or anything like that. Just think it does a much neater job. So that's that one there. So that's that one. Okay, so I'm going to do exactly the same thing with those 5 there, and then I'll sew the buttons on and get some photos.